What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are going to be breaking down UFC 283, which is headlined by Jamal Hill and Glover Teixeira for the light, I guess it's vacant, the light heavyweight title, right? Yuri Prochazka abandoned it, or vacated it rather, because he was injured, had a serious shoulder injury. And Jamal Hill steps up to the plate to fight Glover Teixeira. And this is a big spot for Jamal Hill, right? He got some main event experience under him when he fought Thiago Santos, and he was able to finish him in that fight, late in the fight too, so that's got to give him some confidence. But yeah, huge matchup there. And then we drop down to the flyweight division, and we've got the fourth matchup, I guess, how would you refer to that, a quadrilogy? Between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo, first time that's ever happened in UFC history. Gilbert Burns is fighting Neil Magny in a big welterweight matchup. Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy. We'll talk about the odds in that one. I think they're like a little bit skewed. Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker. And then we're not going to hit the prelims, but there's some decent fights on there. Shogun's fighting right. RoboCop Gregory Rodriguez is matched up against Bruno Ferreira. So Thiago Moises is on this card fighting. So some names to watch out for sure. But we're going to focus on breaking the main card down. Before we get started, though, I do want to hit some news. Follow up on kind of the Francis Ngannou situation and talk about some matchups that have been announced. I saw these on MMA Junkie. So first, I want to talk about Ngannou a little bit because he did an interview with Ariel Helwani that I thought was very enlightening because you got to see so far we had only really seen Dana White's perspective on everything, right? He goes up to the mic at the press conference and he tells you that basically he felt that Francis Ngannou wanted to take the easy way out and fight lower risk competition for more money. And then Ngannou goes in and tells his side of the story to Ariel Helwani, and it doesn't seem that that's the case at all. And I'm inclined to believe Francis Ngannou. He said that he advocated for sponsorship, which I think actually is a touchy one. And I maybe in an unpopular opinion on my end, but I believe in the UFC's policy on this. Because fighters still do have a right to sponsorship. They just can't do it during UFC events or during fight week responsibilities, right? Like they can't endorse their stuff then. But they still have the ability to go out and get contracts with people and sponsor in other capacities, right? Like I think it's just hard for them to get those deals, right? I don't know. I kind of understand where fighters are coming from when they want to have sponsorships within the ring and like during the fight and stuff. And I get their perspective, but I also feel that there is something to the uniformity that really is important to the UFC as a league, right? It's the same with every other professional sports league, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, right? There has to be like a cohesiveness when this is happening. And I don't care what anybody, in my personal opinion, you don't have to like the exact designs, but it looks better when fighters are draped out in their Venom stuff or all Reebok stuff, and they're both wearing something with similar designs in mind, right? And it just flows better. It makes your product look better. And the UFC is still a product the same way the NFL or the NBA is. That's my opinion at least, right? It's kind of, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if fighters need to have better access to representation, like better agents that can go out and get them these bigger deals. I don't know. I don't really know all the ins and outs of it, but I can understand the UFC's position on that kind of stuff, on sponsorship stuff, right? And again, I don't know all the ins and outs. I just know what Ngannou said with Ariel, but if it's in terms of in the octagon stuff, I kind of tend to lean towards the cohesive look of the company and letting the fighters make money for themselves in ways like, well, the thing, too, is here's the next thing we're going to talk about, and I suspected this, and I think I was kind of right, like listening to Ngannou. I think he wants to go box, and he wants the freedom to go fight and pursue things outside of MMA, right? Other combat sports avenues. And Conor McGregor got to do that, and that's what I was going to mention just a second ago, is Conor did a great job of promoting and coming up with a brand of whiskey and say what you want, working with the UFC to push it out, and I know they give him favoritism, but that part of it I do think is unfair because Ngannou is a star. Ngannou is in a position where he is in his athletic prime. And if you want to see him go try his hand at somebody like Tyson Fury or somebody like Deontay Wilder, the time is now. You have a short window where he's going to be in this athletic prime where people consider him the most dangerous man ever. And his fights in the UFC would be bigger if he went and was allowed to pursue these things outside of it, like boxing, I think. Even if he goes and loses to Tyson Fury, people are going to want to come and see how he does when he steps back into the MMA ring or something like that. And it gives him the opportunity to promote himself, make more money, and in turn, make more money for the UFC. I think it's a mistake. I know that the argument is that we tried this with Conor, but Francis is a heavyweight, man. And it's different. It is different. I want to see him go box Tyson Fury. I want to go see him box Wilder, and I don't want to see it in 5 years after he's had to defend his title so many times. I want to see it now. Fuck it. Why not? Do I think he's going to win? No. I think Fury outclasses him, and say what you want about Ngannou's power, but Wilder has ridiculous power too, but he's already figured out a path to do this, 40-plus times in boxing, not including his amateur career. Like, he's going to throw with more crispness, and I think it's hard for Ngannou to land, but he just has that fucking insane, put you out instantly when he touches you power. And if he can translate it to boxing somehow and just land once, man, who knows? But why not let your fighter go and pursue that stuff? I mean, from the perspective of the company, I guess I understand that you want exclusive rights to him, but I don't know, man. I don't know. He also mentioned things like he wanted representations for fighters, I think, president meetings and stuff. So I don't know. It's interesting. And like I said, I tend to side with Ngannou on most of the stuff. The sponsorship stuff, I can kind of understand them shutting that down. And they're not going to overhaul the whole entire, I think, company based on that. They have existing deals, They move forward. Deals with ESPN. Like I said, that cohesiveness is good for the product. The other stuff, though, man, I don't know. I tend to think that, and he asked for healthcare. Fighters should absolutely be provided healthcare. If they're being asked to perform at a high level, a professional level, again, the UFC is a product. If you're and when you have a product, quality is always going to sell. People say that, right? And really what you want are quality martial artists, high-level martial artists in the UFC, right? So if you want that, then I think that you also have the responsibility of taking care of them after they've provided you a service, really. Don't get me wrong, fighters work for the company, all that. I understand, they're contractors, they sign with the company. But they've provided you a service, and I think that you should have to repay them in some way. I don't know if there should be tiers based on your tenure in the UFC, whether it go by years or number of fights or what your status is, if you're a champion. I don't know how it all works. But they should be provided health care in at least some capacity, and I think we need to keep these conversations rolling. And another thing I think, I think fighter contracts should be made public for the most part. I mean, if there are certain things that aren't always released, whatever. I mean, but I think that contracts should be able to be publicly scrutinized. That way we can start, Dana White always talks about the UFC as a business, and it is. But the NFL is, and the NBA is, and people on ESPN are constantly disputing their contracts. And I think that, it would be the only reason, if you're the UFC, that you want it to be transparent is because it's saving you money or profitable to you as a company in some way. You know that if you provided absolute transparency to the public, then there would be pressure put on you, right? I was talking about this last week as well. That's just the reality. I think that when you, I don't know, man. I just feel that, I don't know. It's not gonna change, but fuck it. Let's move on. Anyway, but yeah, all that stuff with Ngannou that came out was fucking interesting to hear. Like I said, good to get his perspective on things, and I tend to agree. And I think him leaving overall sets a precedent too to other fighters. You can walk away, and people are gonna follow Ngannou. He might not be the biggest draw if he goes over to PFL or something, fighting just starching people. He'll be on some highlight reels on ESPN because PFL's contracted with them. Sure. But he's still got to fight, all the way through to get to the tournament and then win the tournament and win $1 million when he probably would have made, I'm guessing, probably not $10 million, but a lot of money fighting John Jones, right? So it's not all about money either. That's why I think he did what was best, and I think he kind of set, like I said, I think he kind of set a precedent for other fighters, and I don't know. Maybe paving a way forward and putting some pressure on the company to start maybe changing some things and taking better care of the fighters. I mean, the criticism's always there, and you always hear it defended by Dana White. But again, he's the only one really answering the questions. I feel like there should be more insight into what's going on, and more transparency makes things better. But anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to some of these matchups that were announced. A big one is Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso for the UFC flyweight 125, right? Flyweight title. And, Alexa Grasso, coming off that big win over Viviana Araujo, Joanne Wood before that, right? She's riding like a 4-fight win streak right now, and she's looked impressive. She's got really good boxing, but the question is, can she overcome the fucking mountain that is Valentina Shevchenko, right? We'll see. I feel like it would have been good for somebody like Alexa Grasso to get maybe a fight or two before this happened, but anyway, it's an interesting matchup, and the women's flyweight division's they're in a tough spot because Valentina dominates everyone. So you're looking for this new up-and-coming talent, like some new challenges to present her. And we saw her challenged in her last fight, right? But I don't know. It just feels like I wish we could have seen a couple more fights from Alexa Grasso before this matchup. But, hey, maybe she'll go out and prove people wrong. Another huge fight that just got announced that I want to talk about is Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan. This is going to be a headliner for UFC Fight Night 221. I'm on MMA Junkie right now. I'm trying to pull up the date. Is there a date? I don't see a date. I'm probably reading right past it. March 11th. Yeah, I was. I read right past it, of course. March 11th at the Theater at Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas. Right? A couple other fights have been announced for that card. J.J. Aldrich is fighting on that card. Rafael Sunsau's fighting on that card. Ooh, Rafael Sunsau versus Kyler Phillips. That's a good fight. But Merab versus Petr Yan is huge, right? Because for Merab, you got to think that if he beats Yan, it puts him in title contention. And he's probably going to start getting thrown. If he doesn't get a title shot, he's going to be thrown in with names like Corey Sandhagen. Going to be thrown in with names like, who was I just fucking thinking about? Oh my God, it left me. It'll come back to me. But anyway, the interesting thing for me with Merab is if he goes out here and beats Petr Yan, right? Let's say he goes out and wins. Like I said, he is going to get a top two. Oh, Chito Vera, of course, the guy that Corey Sandhagen is matched up against, right? He's probably going to be fighting one of those guys next. Oh, Sean O'Malley's another obvious one, right? God. But anyway, he'll be fighting one of those guys next if he can get a win over Yan. No doubt. If he can get past Yan, he's going to be in that talk, right? And the question then becomes, what about Aljo? Because you know that him, Ali Quinta, Merab, those guys are all very, very close, right? I mean, Aljamain's traveled with him. He put it on his Instagram. Like, they're very good friends. I would think that the path they would take is that Aljo moves up, right? He moves up to 145. I think that you want to avoid, like, it's not worth it. And Merab might be a contender there. And I think that Aljo, if you look at him, I mean, man, he is fucking, like, shredded. He's a big dude. I think he could move up to 145, no problem, right? If he did it right. Like, maybe took the John Jones approach to go to 145, especially because he seems to battle injuries a lot. So, a period of time, maybe take him another fight at 135 and then move up when Merab moves into that title picture. If he does, right? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, though. It kind of puts some pressure on Aljamain to either fight Merab, whose goal is going to be a title, or step out of the way and let Merab try to climb to the top. Who knows? I don't know, but that's an interesting matchup, right? And like I said, the more big names that get put in front of Merab and the more he takes out, the more that clash seems inevitable, and they'll have to make a decision, right? Does Aljo move up? He might be. He also, I don't follow it closely enough, guys. He might be public about saying that he's not going to fight, right? Like that he's not going to fight him and that he will move up or he'll figure it out then. I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, if I had to guess, I'm guessing it wouldn't happen. I guess he would move. But that's the matchup. Let's move on to breaking down this main card. And the first fight is Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker. And if there is ever a guy who you kind of count out in every fight, it's Paul Craig. Because his game, in theory, or like if you look at the amount of data that you have for MMA, right? Being on the bottom is not successful a large majority of the time, even if you are a submission specialist. Maybe early on in your career, but as you start to move into more advanced ranks in the UFC, let's say, like Paul Craig, you are going to start running into more and more problems getting submissions from your back. It's just not a good place to be in a mixed martial arts fight. But Paul Craig finds a way to win from there consistently. He did it against Nikita Krylov. He did it against Jamal Hill, right? He did it against, who did he get? Ankalaev in the last second of the third round, right? Or like I think it was literally the last second. 4 minutes, 59 seconds into the third round. He hit it on Kennedy and Jacobou. He defies kind of what your general advice would be for even jiu-jitsu practitioners in MMA. Like, if you look at somebody like Gilbert Burns, he still wants to go out and take you down. We'll talk about him on this card, obviously, coming up, right? He's a jiu-jitsu guy, but he wants to go out, use his, like, punches and take you down. And not that Paul Craig doesn't want to do the same thing. We see him try to do takedowns and stuff, but somehow, from the bottom, he's able to come up with these wins, and he's so active with his guard. And what he's really good at is he transitions from, like, wrist control, and his opponents will, like, focus on the wrist control and trying to clear it, and then he'll advance his legs up. Right? He'll start manipulating your positioning with his legs from his guard. So he's really good at moving back and forth between those two things and creating dilemmas where the person has to think about what to clear, right? And he overwhelms you, and then he throws on submissions. And that's what happens to a lot of guys, where they dive into something thinking they're safe, like Krylov did. Threw a punch in a little too hard, and Craig just, boom, immediately locked on the triangle. And like I said, it's not normal to see that type of success. And you still, when it happens, he gets beat up from there. I mean, if you see some of the bombs that Krylov landed on him, it's shocking that he didn't just go out cold. He stayed with it somehow, though, and then found a way to get the fucking submission. And it's like, I don't know, you feel like he is out of it sometimes, and then he pulls shit like that off, right? But I think Volkan Ozdemir was a good example of this isn't a good strategy to take into somebody, especially like... Actually, you know, when I think about this matchup with Johnny Walker, I was going to say somebody like Johnny was really dangerous. Like, he is dangerous. And I think that on the feet, he has a very clear advantage, a very clear power advantage. Don't get me wrong, Paul Craig has nice kicks to the body that he throws. He does just have a nice 1-2 that he throws out, right? Brings things straight down the pipe. But he's a little bit slower there than Johnny Walker's going to be, I think. And he's definitely going to lack the explosiveness that Johnny has. And he's going to lack the variety of an attack, which is important, right? I think Johnny has a big advantage in the footwork department too. The thing that's going to be interesting is that Johnny Walker tends to throw big explosive movements and overextends himself and makes technical errors sometimes, right? He puts himself in positions where he looked good against Ion Cutelaba, right? But he still got taken down, controlled there before he took his back. If somebody like Paul Craig is able to get into those positions where he's really a specialist at submitting you, it could be dangerous for Johnny Walker on the ground. And is he going to, if Paul Craig can repeatedly push him up against the cage and attempt takedowns, can he find a way to kind of grind that out, expose some of those technical errors that Johnny's shown in the past, and fucking find a way to lock up a submission win? I think that's Paul Craig's path to victory. The problem is going to be, like I said, getting Johnny moving backwards against the cage with his striking. I think that's going to be a really tall task for Paul Craig to overcome in this fight, right? I think I'm taking Johnny Walker. I think that Johnny just showed some improvement in the ground department when he fought against Cutelaba, right? Like I said, still taken down. But I think that if you watch Paul Craig versus Volkan Ozdemir, if you can stuff a couple or even work your way back to the feet, he doesn't run through his takedowns. Like when he shoots for a double leg, he doesn't run through them, meaning that he just stalls out, and a lot of the times you're able to just get him onto his back, which he wants to be there, but again, still not a good place to be. I would think that Johnny's goal would not be to play down there and to disengage and keep it on the feet. I think that Craig against Johnny has a hard time closing the distance with the striking. I think he has a hard time taking Johnny down. And I think that because Johnny moves so much and gets in and out so often, it's going to be really hard for him to get any sort of like takedown strung together and get a hold of him. I think Johnny controls the range. I think he controls the striking. And another thing to watch out for is when Paul Craig shoots, Johnny's going to be looking for knees and flying knees up the middle, right? Those can sometimes miss, though, and those could be opportunities for Craig to get it to the ground. But all in all, I think Johnny has a good chance to win this fight and control the striking and prevent Craig from ever closing off that distance and getting the takedowns. I like Johnny Walker in this fight. Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy is next. This is a big fight in the flyweight division. And guys, this is a fight where, don't get me wrong, I train at Easton in Centennial, right? That's where I teach. I teach just the fundamentals class and shit, but it's hard not to be biased when you see Lauren Murphy in the gym. And I've seen her in the gym. I've never talked to her, right? But I have seen her working stuff, working private lessons at our branch before, right? So it's hard not to be biased in situations like this. But I think the odds really are just skewed. I think that Lauren Murphy has a really good chance to go out and win this fight. I think that Andrade is smoother on the feet. She's probably a little more technical in that department. And I think that, honestly, Murphy's striking on the feet is a little bit like mechanical, right? Like it's a little bit readable. I think you can get beads on it, and I think Andrade has an advantage there. But again, I think she's going to be able to, she's strong. Lauren Murphy's very strong. You can see it in the way she's built. And she's a pretty big girl, and she's coming off a big win over Tate where she was stringing her takedowns together nicely, fending off the takedowns from Miesha Tate. I think if this starts turning into a grappling match, regardless of how, I know Andrade is good on the ground, but sometimes it does matter to just be strong. And you hear that. I don't want to discredit Murphy's technique at all, right? Like a lot of the times I kind of think that announcers use that a lot. Like they're like, oh, they're strong. With somebody like Lauren Murphy, when she's on the ground, she does a very good job of staying technical from top position, especially, right? I mean, like she's good on the ground. She's very technical, and I think that's where a lot of her strength comes from, is because she has solid technique. But she is just also she's a physically strong girl, and I think that will play a big part in this matchup. I think she's going to be able to move Jessica Andrade around the octagon a little bit. I think she's going to be able to pin her up against the cage and wear on her, right? And one thing about Murphy, if she's really good at hitting elbows off the break, she's a little bit susceptible to them as well. We saw Miesha Tate hit a big one on her, right? And like we saw her get hit with some other ones, but she does a good job of attacking off the break. I think that if Lauren Murphy can just walk Jessica Andrade down with a jab, a 1-2, keep things simple in the boxing, and move her backwards and just turn this into a dirty fight, I think Murphy has a real fucking chance to win. Like, I think that she could go out and kind of bully Andrade around a little bit. The question is going to be, can she avoid getting finessed? It's going to be it's this way with every fight, right? But it's who can implement their game plan. If Andrade can kind of keep things, Andrade has real power no matter who you are, right? Like if she starts teeing off on Murphy and Murphy's not able to keep her on the back foot, and Andrade just getting her footwork going, cutting angles, and like I said, she's smoother than Murphy on the feet. There's no denying that. But I really like betting on this fight. I think I'm going to put like 2 units on Murphy. As big an underdog as she is, I think that the odds that she goes out and puts up a really good fight or beats Andrade are decent, right? So I'm putting a couple units on Lauren Murphy. I think I'm going to throw 2 units on her, even though she's a big dog, right? I'll probably put 2 units on Johnny Walker as well, just money line, just throwing it out there. I'm not giving out betting advice, right? I'm gonna start providing a spreadsheet. I'm gonna I have to go through and put my picks in and everything, but I'll keep it public that I'll display. But I'm not giving out advice. I'm just letting you guys know how I'm going to play this. Take it or leave it, right? Next is Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. And this is a big fight in the welterweight division and a big spot for Neil Magny, right? You know, Gilbert Burns, I think his last fight was against Hamzat, right? I'm mixing up the order that he fought in. I believe his last fight was against Hamzat. Yes, yeah. And that was back in April. Yeah, last fight against Hamzat. And he lost that one, right? A unanimous decision. But, man, the second round especially, he beat Hamzat up a little bit. And Gilbert Burns is one of the baddest motherfuckers in the welterweight division, no doubt. He has real power in his hands, which I think is a big factor in this fight against Magny, because Magny has the kind of style that wears on you, right? We did see from Gilbert that he faded a little bit in the 3rd round. Right? But he went fucking hard as fuck in the 2nd. I mean, you could tell that he was really trying to hit Chimaev with everything that he had. And he he put out a lot of energy in that 2nd round. And I think if he manages that a little better, he should be okay, especially in this 3-round matchup. I don't know. I know, again, there's this tendency, right, to kind of lean towards Neil Magny in this fight as the underdog, and because he trains at elevation and all of that stuff. But if I'm being honest with you guys, I feel that this is a favorable matchup for Gilbert Burns. I think he has a big power advantage. I think that in those situations in the clinch, right, where Magny has a lot of advantages against people sometimes, I think that he's not going to have those same advantages against a guy like Gilbert Burns, who's going to be very competent there and also a lot stronger than Magny, I think. So I think Gilbert Burns is going to be able to put we talked about this in the last one too. I think Burns puts his style on Magny, and it's a tough matchup for Magny. If Magny can keep pressuring Burns backwards with steady volume, right, I think that he could potentially make things problematic. But I think the problem is that he'll leave some opportunities for Burns to land over the top. And if Burns can start working the body a little bit as well and mixing in those body shots to get the hands coming down, those opportunities against a tall guy like Magny, I think will present themselves. So I think Gilbert's probably going to be able to move. He'll be the one, I think, more likely to move Magny backwards because of his power. And then when they get into those clinch situations, I think that, Burns' jiu-jitsu experience, and he takes people down fairly well for being a jiu-jitsu practitioner in the UFC, right? I mean, it's not like fucking Khabib or anything like that. It's not like somebody wrestled for their whole lives, but he does a pretty good job of getting the fight to the ground. So I think that in those situations where it goes up against the cage, where Magny usually sees a lot of success, we're going to see him struggle a little bit and get it put on him by Burns. That's my honest opinion. So in terms of the money line and betting, I'm staying away from this one. I think Burns is too big of a favorite. All right, Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. We all know the story here, right? First fight ends in a draw. Moreno comes back and submits Figueiredo with a rear naked choke. And then they fight again, and Figueiredo takes the belt back. And now the quadrilogy, I guess we should call it, right, is set for UFC 283 in Brazil this weekend, this Saturday. And this is a big fight because the winner of this is going to kind of put this to bed, I think. I think people see it as kind of even right now. Also, let's not forget that, and this, it doesn't change the outcome. Like, the point deductions are there for a reason. They do what they do to even the fight out. But if Figueiredo had not got a point taken from him in the first fight, this might never be a thing. But he did, and that draw in the first fight is what caused it to go to the next, where Moreno won. And then, so that strike ended up costing him a point. I think it was a low blow that cost him a point. Ended in a draw, and now we're here, right? And this is going to be a fight where I could go into a big, like a technical analysis of who I think has the better chance to do this, that, right? But the reality is I think this comes down to which fighter is going to make the bigger adjustments. And I give the edge to Brandon Moreno for this reason, right? I know it's a fight in Brazil, like Figueiredo has home field advantage. Maybe, and again, I could be completely fucking wrong. I'm just guessing here, right? I have no idea about like how there's no way to prove this. But I feel that Moreno stepping out of the trilogy that he just had with Deiveson Figueiredo and going and fighting a guy like Kai Kara-France, who's been streaking kind of through the flyweight division and showing you real promise, to go out and finish a guy like that and then come back with some renewed perspective on things and kind of get away from that trilogy for a little bit. I think it's good mentally for him to just go clear another hurdle and then come back and approach this fight with Figueiredo with new perspective. And that is the sole reason that I'm going with Moreno in this fight, because I think that trying to predict what's going to happen in this is fucking crazy. Like way too hard. I don't know. But if I had to just step back and analyze it from a perspective where I'm not looking at technique, I'm not trying to predict who's going to do what necessarily. I'm just looking at maybe where their mental health is at right now, because you got to think, not that Figueiredo is mentally unhealthy. That's not what I meant. I just mean, like, where's his mental state in terms of how he's thinking about Moreno? Because for Figueiredo, he's been tied up in nothing but this trilogy for a long time, and I think he wants free of it. Whereas Moreno, I think, seems to have a healthier way of dealing with it. And I think stepping out, gaining additional confidence against an opponent like Kai Kara-France, who's dangerous, and coming back in against Figueiredo, I just think that the momentum right now is on Moreno's side. It's just how I feel. I don't know. Could be wrong. And like I said, it's so hard to tell what's actually going to happen in this fucking fight. I think anybody who, like, you're just guessing, essentially. So I'm going to try to analyze it from a different perspective, right? And go with that. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going with Moreno in this fight. I think he finishes Figueiredo Saturday night. Like I said, going on more like maybe even gut instinct more than anything and just trying to justify it in some weird way. But that's who I'm going with. I got Moreno this weekend. And finally, our main event, Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill for the vacant light heavyweight title. Like I said at the beginning, Yuri Prochazka relinquished the title when he injured his shoulder. I guess it was a terrible shoulder injury. Like Dana White said, one of the worst ones they'd ever seen. So he relinquishes the title, and Jamal Hill steps up to fight Glover Teixeira. And this is a matchup where Jamal Hill's a betting favorite this weekend. And I'll be honest, I got money on Glover. I know he's 43, and I know that this is a tough fight against a young, powerful, dangerous guy in Jamal Hill. His only loss, by the way, is to a guy earlier on the card, Paul Craig, where Craig broke his arm with the armbar and then triangled him and just elbowed him from that position. His arm's just like flopping around. That's the only loss on Jamal Hill's record, right? Is a guy who's opening up this card against Johnny Walker. Jamal Hill has rebounded, though, from that loss, right? And since then, he's picked up wins over Jimmy Crute by KO, Johnny Walker by KO, and Thiago Santos by KO in the 4th round. And that going into the 4th round like that, I think that gives you some confidence going into this weekend because you know that you can go deep into a fight and finish a guy. Here's the thing, though. And there's 2 things to consider, right, I think, with Glover and going into this. First, he is 43, and he's coming off of a war against Gary Prochazka. And you hear guys, like Joe Rogan says this all the time, right? Or like people say this all the time, I guess. I don't know if it's, I think I've heard it on Joe's podcast. Whether he actually said it, I don't know. But that wars kind of take a piece of you, right? Like they take something from you when you have them. And Glover's 43, and it makes you wonder how many of those wars he has left in him, if it turns into that, right? The other thing, though, to consider with Glover, on the flip side of that, right, is that he looked good in his last fight. I didn't see the significant drop-off in a guy who didn't look competitive. I know Yuri finished him at the end, but he looked good, man. I mean, he was catching kicks, timing his takedowns. He boxes his way into his takedowns. He'll get you up against the cage and work from there. He wears on you, and if he's unsuccessful, he will go for it again, right? He's good at reversing position from the bottom. Glover Teixeira is fucking crafty on the ground. And let's not forget that he submitted Thiago Santos. And Thiago Santos gave Jamal Hill a lot of issues in the wrestling department. I just think that Santos is unfamiliar with fighting that style of fight, so it tired him out much more quickly, and that's why we saw Jamal Hill not taking anything away from the knockout. But I think that's why those opportunities were there for him to knock Santos out, is because Santos was tired from fighting that style of fight. Glover is not going to get tired from fighting that style of fight. And if he can go out and immediately push Hill backwards, and if Hill overextends on something, and he's in a big moment right now. He's in a title fight relatively early on in his career, right? So if Glover can come out and capitalize on these things, and Glover has a chin, man. I mean, like, I know he's been knocked out and he's been through it, but like, he can take a shot too. You saw that from the Yuri fight. So the question is, if Jamal lands, does it go? But all in all, I just have a really strong feeling that Glover Teixeira goes out and gets it done. If he can go out, like I was going to say, sorry, I got sidetracked. That happens often. But if he can go out when they're dry and get a hold of Jamal Hill early and press things up against the cage, there are going to be real opportunities for him there to submit Jamal Hill. I don't think Jamal Hill's felt anybody in the UFC grapple like Glover can grapple, and I think that he's going to be surprised when he gets a hold of him, because the opportunities that Jamal Hill had to stand up against Thiago Santos aren't going to be as readily available against Glover Teixeira. I like Glover in this matchup, man. I think this is a big spot for Hill, and it's relatively sudden, despite the fact that he's young in his career, and he no doubt has a chance. His hands are dangerous. He could go out there and fucking like... There's something different about the way that guys who have serious power hit, and there is something different about the way that Jamal hits you, right? So if he can go out there and land on Glover and get him working and keep Glover on the back foot and stave off some of those takedown attempts, he has a real chance, right? But I like Glover this weekend. And again, this isn't betting advice. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. I'm putting 3 units on Glover to win because he's the underdog, man. And I think that his style is favorable, and I don't think that I saw enough degradation in his techniques in his fight against Yuri to bet against him in this fight. I thought he looked like world champion material for where the light heavyweight division is at right now. And that fall off can sometimes happen very suddenly, so I could be wrong in that. But I think in a guy in Jamal Hill, I think he's just still, say what you want, a little, I don't know, tough definitely, but just a little bit green for this spot. And I think Glover has a favorable matchup, right? Unless he gets fucking clipped like he did against like Anthony Johnson or some shit. Like I said, I think that's Jamal's method, his best probably method of victory, right? That's his most likely method of victory. But as the fight wears on and this becomes a fight, I like Glover to win, I think, man, despite his age. So those are my picks for the fights coming up this weekend. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. I will catch you guys later. I'll put an episode out probably Sunday to talk about the results and all that shit. So catch you guys later. Enjoy the fights. Enjoy playoff football this weekend. I'll be rooting for the Eagles. Go Eagles. And thank you guys again for tuning in. Bye-bye.